The only way to avoid genetically modified crops is to eat only organic. Organic still does not allow genetic modification. Now that may change because the industry is working extremely hard to reduce the stringency of organic laws. And if they succeed, we're going to end up not even having to see a label, and we're going to end up eating genetically modified crops. It turns out that when you look at the effects on humans, you notice that people are getting, it's like an epidemic of allergies, food allergies. There's all the things that I've mentioned are immune modulators. Heavy metals, GMO crops, and these plasticizers, the phthalates, the pesticides, the persistent organic phosphates, they're all immune modulators. And it's been shown that when you put these stuff on a crop, on a food, and the person ingests the food that they weren't necessarily sensitive to, they can become sensitized to it. In addition, the accumulation of these toxins in our body makes our immune system also more likely to develop autoimmune disease. There's a book by Janet Nakazawa called The Autoimmune Epidemic. And in fact, the next meeting of this organization that I just came back from, I'm also the chair for that next meeting, is going to be on autoimmune disease. And what she has found is that there are outbreaks of autoimmunity near these toxic dumps. And there's a clear association. This is not just in alternative medicine. She has connections with people at Johns Hopkins, and the foreword of her book was written by the chief of the autoimmune research labs at Johns Hopkins. It's very clear that these toxins are part of this epidemic of autoimmunity, asthma, allergies. So now I hope I've completely depressed you all. No, I hope I haven't. Because there is an answer. I mean, the answer is education. And it's very difficult to get yourselves educated, to expect education to come passively. Because what's being fed to you actively is being fed by self-interest, by these companies that have interest in your not knowing the truth. So you actually have to do something active to go out and seek out this information. But it is available. Believe me, it is available. And you can look on these websites and learn more about it. And I'd be happy to talk to anybody about this. You can see I have no emotional entanglement about this at all. And so I'll be happy to speak about it with anybody and try to help you get more information. So first thing is educate yourselves. Get educated. Become aware. The second thing is, once you become educated, you start to be able to avoid getting exposed to these things. You actually learn how to stay away from genetically modified crops. By the way, most soy is genetically modified. Almost all corn is genetically modified. Canola is genetically modified. And cotton is genetically modified. And there are other genetically modified. You know why they genetically modify crops, by the way? Aside from being able to own the patent to them? The major genetic modification that Monsanto uses is something they call Roundup Ready, or Liberty Link. You know what Roundup is? Roundup's a pesticide. It's a very deadly pesticide. They found out it was very inconvenient that when they used a lot of this pesticide, the crops were dying. Can't have that. So they made these genetically modified crops that were resistant to Roundup. They call them Roundup Ready. Isn't that nice to know that these crops were designed to get huger doses of pesticides so that we can, consume them freely? It's wonderful. And the same thing with the Liberty Link. It's just another pesticide that's being genetically modified to be able to resist. The crops are able to be able to resist these huge doses of pesticides. So avoidance, education, avoidance, and you can avoid it. If you stay organic, for the most part, you're going to avoid the genetically modified. Pesticide levels are much lower. The residues are much lower in organic foods. I found out something very disturbing that I didn't know, that many of the imported fruits are sprayed at the border. They're organically grown outside of our country, but they're sprayed at the border when they come in. So if you can, eat local. Get to know your local farmer. First of all, your carbon footprint is going to be reduced. You know, they're not going to have to haul these things over huge distances. But get to know your local farmer. If they don't use pesticides and they rotate their crops and they're careful and they have a certain amount of personal integrity, and you learn about them, eat their food. That's the best way to ensure that it's going to be safe. The third thing, aside from education and avoidance, is detoxification. That's my fifth pillar. Detoxification, detoxification, detoxification. No, our ancestors didn't have to do that. They got their own natural detoxification. They were running around sweating. So we got a certain amount of detoxification when we get rid of sweat. A certain amount of these substances are in our sweat and are able to be released. But we can maximize that. There's far infrared saunas are available for that. We have one in our office for our patients. It's a very useful way, particularly of getting rid of these persistent organic phosphates, the pesticides, the plasticizers, the phthalates, the bisphenol A. Chelation is a marvelous way of getting rid of heavy metals. You can do oral chelation. It's very slow, but intravenous chelation has changed lives I can't tell you how many times. Even to the extent that people who have autoimmune diseases, when they've been able to get rid of the mercury and lead in their bodies, the autoimmunity reduces. We've seen that. We've actually seen reduction in antibodies just through chelation. Now, chelation also, there's some reports that there was one report that it reduced cancer incidence in a cohort of individuals that they chelated by 90% from the expected incidence of cancer. So there's a lot of things that purifying our body can really help with. And then, of course, you know, exercise is really useful because we do sweat. We breathe heavily, and some of these things can be released in our lungs, particularly these volatile hydrocarbons that we take in, some of the plasticizers. Stay lean, because a lot of these persistent organic phosphates are stored in our fat tissue. So getting rid of fat tissue is very important for lots of reasons: cardiovascular health, cancer, as well as getting rid of these toxins, these poisons. Okay, so I chose to focus on one of the pillars that I usually don't speak too much about. I usually never get to it. I start talking about diet for the last few years, and I never got out of the diet. So there are other poisons that are related to diet, and I call them poisons because I want to make it clear that these are not foods. They're called foods. But I want to make it clear that these are not foods, they're poisons. And I'll mention a couple of them. Refined carbohydrates. It's a poison. You know, we call it a food, but our ancestors never ate refined carbohydrates. These highly processed, refined foods have an effect on our body that's very, very dangerous, deadly even. It causes a huge rise in our blood sugar. That blood sugar rise causes our body to have to put out a lot of insulin. Now, in ancient times, our hunter-gatherer ancestors never had to put out very much insulin with their pancreas. The most that they were ever exposed to was some of these fibrous fruits, which weren't all that sweet. You know, fruits weren't all that sweet millions of years ago. They've mostly been hybridized to accommodate our sweet tooth, which has increased over the years. You notice that apples are getting sweeter and sweeter. You know, it used to be these green crab apples. Now you get pink ladies. You know, pink ladies didn't even exist. That hybrid wasn't even in existence some years ago. Our fruits are getting sweeter and sweeter. So our ancestors never really had to deal with high blood sugar. And their pancreases were nice. They were relaxed all the time. They never had to deal with these wide swings. Now our lives are full of these huge swings in blood sugar, which cause insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, and eventually diabetes, heart disease, and guess what, cancer. Those of you who were present at the morning meeting, our 11 o'clock meeting, we made the point that cancer loves sugar, and sugar in any form. You don't have to be eating sugar. You can be eating refined carbohydrates. Those refined carbohydrates turn into sugar in the body, and guess where they concentrate?